Calls to order at 6:03. Wendy, I can see you. Can you hear me okay? Oh, we're ready to go. Okay, great. Couple of things as we start the meeting. We're going to once again move the clerk's report and the warrants toward the end of the meeting. So, and we'll do that as a joint motion and a consent agenda. And so we won't be doing that right away. The first thing we'll do is start with a discussion of the 8 characteristics of school boards. So I'm going to share my screen, and you will see, and I'm not sure, I won't be able to see your hands if they're raised, so you may have to unmute yourself and just speak if you have something you want to say during this process. We'll talk about it toward the end, but I'm just going to run through these 8 characteristics and then have a look at the first one. So I'm going to share my screen, which takes a second. And now you should all see 8 characteristics of an effective school board. And I'm going to go to the last one because it sort of gets to what we're doing right now. And that is that effective school boards take part in team development and training, sometimes with their superintendents, to build shared knowledge, values, and commitments for their improvement efforts. And that's what we're doing right now. That's what we started last week with looking at the statute around the powers of school boards, and that's what we're doing right now and for the next several minutes. So I just want to point out some things with each of these. I'm not going to read them to you because you're all perfectly capable of doing that. But the first one is to establish clear goals. And I think that's particularly meaningful right now because we're in a new reality and we're probably going to have to consider some new policies and some new goals and really clarify our vision for what we want the schools to be doing over the next period of time, over this new reality. We're not going to go back to the way things were, so we really have to define as clearly as we can what goals we want to have. The second is effective school boards have strong shared beliefs and values about what is possible for students and their ability to learn. And this is something, again, that we all share. We all believe that students have the ability to learn at a high level, and we can teach them at a high level. The third one is about accountability, and it primarily means that we need to have good information on student achievement. We need to be really clear about what information we want to have and be clear about how it relates to our goals. The fourth one talks about a strong communication structure, which I think we're in the process of building, especially with the leadership councils. The fifth one is the importance of monitoring and using information. They talk about data here, but we need to expand that significantly because there's a lot more to information than just data and numbers, and certainly that's true in the school systems. The sixth one is, it talks about resources, aligning, and also important is sustaining resources. The seventh one is about collaboration and trust. This is something that we have to build. It doesn't just happen, it's intentional, and we have to build that. We're in pretty good shape historically in this situation, but it's an up and down process and it ebbs and flows, and we need to be really attentive to that. Then the last one again is building shared knowledge. So I'm gonna stop sharing now and have a look and see who else is here and admit them. And then share again another document that has to do primarily with the first, well, no, I guess I'm not. So any thoughts or questions that anyone has about the 8 characteristics of school boards? This is based on research that the National School Board Association developed with the Center for Public Education, and it's reflected in the Vermont School Board Association and associations across the state. So I'm going to admit one more member here. Any questions or any comments on that? Okay. I don't see any little blue hands, so we will move to administrative report. Lyle presented us with a long very comprehensive report, which I hope you're not going to go over the whole thing, but there are some highlights that I don't know, and I can show that the graph or any other parts of it if you want to have things up on the screen, Lyle. Or
Okay.
you can probably do it yourself as well.
Yep, sure. So because it is long, again, I did try to get it to you ahead of time so you could spend some time looking at it. There are a couple of different specifics that you had asked for, so I want to make sure that we have some time to report out on that. You can read the section about food distribution. I do want to make sure everyone knows about Diversity Month activities. Instead of just last Friday, which would have been Diversity Day, we're spreading things out throughout the month. Actually, Ann Beekman is the board rep, I believe, on that committee, so she may be able to add something to that. There is the data collected. This data is could change daily. Depends, teachers, principals, counselors work all the time to try to make contact with families that they have had a hard time making contact with. Case managers reaching out to students on IEPs just to make sure that we are doing whatever we possibly can. I've put in there a flow chart of what happens, and it's some variation for every single school of what happens if we are not able to get in touch with a family, or if we're feeling like there's some sort of concern, and narrowing it to, is it a medical concern? Is it a behavioral concern? Academic, other? And then each school has identified who gets in touch with the family and some of the types of issues that families might be dealing with. And of course, at this point, we have narrowed it down so that it's very few families that we've had no contact with at all. And in the notes, I put some of the different ways that we are making contact with families. It could be text, email, phone calls, check-ins with the behavior people, homework club staffed by paras so that families could join if there's any kind of issue with academics, student teacher conferences, home visits. We've had a few home visits by the nurse, by teachers, by the behavior interventionists. We've done things like adjust the times. When you have a family that has multiple children in the family, they can't necessarily all be online at the same time, or they are using one computer. So adjusting the times of different times when people are able to check in. And then if we don't hear from a family, then we have set up systems at each school for well child checks. And that's all laid out in the notes as well, so you can read that. I would like Deb Cardane, I think Deb's here. We have some amazingly touching success stories, so I wondered if Deb could just take a minute and talk a little bit about some of the success stories we've had with families that have been hard to reach.
Sure, I'd be happy to. We reached out to teachers and just asked them, because we really felt like, it's their stories that are really going to give a good portrait of what this kind of work looks like. So I'm going to share some of their responses, and this is really a description of their extreme perseverance and teamwork. So a couple themes. So teachers are really working hard to develop project-based units of studies to increase engagement. So I'll read their direct words. First teacher, we've been working to get kids engaging without so much time on screens. For example, we've been teaching about volume. Kids had a project last week to make a robot out of recycled materials, find the total volume, and bring their robot to class meeting on Friday. Still doing the math, but in off-screen ways. Another teacher wrote recently, we've been sending students letters and fun activities through the mail. My students love the post office so much now. They've been writing back to us and sending us lots of letters and fun things, just like we did at school. Another teacher, over the past 2 weeks, my students have been doing in-depth studies of vernal pools. I've seen a significant increase in participation and parent involvement. Students are far more engaged in the work, and families including those who have been historically less connected to school, have shared they feel empowered to have clear avenue to be supportive of their child's learning. Teachers are also finding ways to overcome families' discomfort with the internet. This teacher wrote, I have one parent who hates technology, has no email, and has health issues. She does love the phone, so we call and chat. In order to access the internet, we talk through it on the phone and get it working and move on. She calls me the next day for a refresher and moves on. It's always a great feeling when we get things working for her and for him. Teachers are providing one-on-one attention to guide students. This is another teacher. I just had a solid breakthrough with a student this morning. She's the only kid in my class who isn't submitting many assignments. Today we met one-on-one and I walked her through every single assignment one at a time, talking through every detail until she was able to do it independently. She was so relieved. Teachers are working to support families in establishing an internet connection. I had a family who did not have internet service. We've worked together to get Comcast out. They had to dig and lay the lines, a big process. Then they were having troubles getting my emails with daily videos, so we discovered they could get them on the Remind app. Then they were having trouble with Zoom. We could see each other, but their audio didn't work, so we Zoomed and spoke on the phone. We had to do it outside until their internet was set up. These parents have persevered through so many difficulties and are really working to make it work for their son. Teachers are also collaborating in teams and persisting in problem solving with students and families. We tried a variety of reach out methods, text, phone calls, emails to a family as well as the student. After 14 plus attempts, the student and parent responded agreeing to join a lesson. This process took many weeks and many invitations. The student is now attending most of the time. We continue to reach out in a variety of ways prior to each session to ensure he's always able to access his daily meetings. We feel so fortunate to finally have been able to connect with the student and family and look forward to our sessions each day. It's been worth every call and every email to text to see his face and work with him each day. So teachers are working hard and families are working hard, and it's a very solid team effort that's going on.
And I had asked Deb to do that to preserve the anonymity of families rather than individual principals to report out to you, because that sometimes makes it so that it's easy to tell who we're talking about. Another specific that you had asked about was connectivity, and Paul has been overseeing the project of that. So I'll ask Paul to report out on how we're doing with getting families connected.
Sure, we've been collating data from for the most part from the counselors. Greg Stoller has been organizing that group and gathering that information. I've sort of pulled it together. He's given me most of the information. I did a few tweaks on the spreadsheet. It looks to me as if, and this number changes on a regular basis, approximately 50 families and about, 55 families, about 70 students overall who are experiencing weak internet or no internet. And I've sort of done some mapping analysis. I don't have the technology chops to overlay all the maps, but there are few enough data points that I can look at addresses and broadband maps and Xfinity Wi-Fi hotspot maps and cable maps and try and get a sense of what are the possible solutions for families. And a piece that's come up recently is we've determined a way, sort of in doing the map analysis, it struck me that there were some complexes, Westgate, Ledgewood, Mountain Home, that are have a number of our students, and in some cases, students that have weak or no internet. And those are also places that have Wi-Fi hotspots. And we now just recently have determined that there is a way to get those families those connections. So it feels like we'll be able to knock down that number. I'm reasonably confident we can knock down that number, but it's a fairly recent development. On the other end of the spectrum, there are, in doing the map analysis, there are families that, typical of Vermont, don't have cable, don't necessarily have cell service, don't necessarily have, I mean, DSL or satellite maybe are the only solutions there. Those are the toughest nuts to crack, and those will unfortunately likely be the last ones we can get on board. And it may require some other solution, like a mobile hotspot or something like that, where there's a designated time. But there are lower hanging fruit that we can certainly, that we're working on now. It's now a process of getting back to the counselors with these new options and making sure those are available to families. Those numbers do not include the families that have indicated they do not wish to have internet access, and there are some, and other arrangements are being made for them.
Paul, can you, I've heard that comment about people that don't want internet access, and without a number attached to that, that could be 20%, it could be, well, in Putney, Herb actually sent a number, which is 3 people, which I think is around 2%. I think it's important to know that number rather than think that that's really a big part of the problem. And the reason I say that is I've been watching a lot of the committee meetings in the legislature this week, trying to keep track of what's happening as far as the unapproved budgets. And in the Senate Health Committee and in the Senate Finance Committee, there are questions about the areas, where the physical areas are, where services are not adequate. And by adequate, the Finance Committee set a standard of 100, a synchronous 100 up, 100 down. Yeah, that's the goal. And there's now an emergency broadband plan to use some of the federal money to make that a reality and to get it to everybody that doesn't have better than 25/3 service. And the education secretary was asked for the numbers of students and the physical areas so that they could use that information in preparing that plan. And he didn't have it. And apparently he's asked for some information about that, but not the data. So if you could put those numbers together and send them to me, I would be happy to send them up.
Sure, a couple of comments. The data that I have seen, I would say on the order of 10 or fewer families throughout the district are saying, no, I don't want internet at all.
So throughout
throughout
the 2,000 or the almost 2,000 student district.
Yes, 2,400. Yeah, 2,400 students total.
Yep.
And the other thing I can say is I can show whoever on the map those areas where there is least service. It's the north end of Putney, it's up the West River Valley, and it's out the west part of Guilford.
Sure, great. I saw Emily Kornheiser had her blue hand up. Did you want to? I don't see it now. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I don't know
There
what
you
your
are.
protocol is under normal circumstances, and I know it even less in Zoom circumstances. So I'm sorry if it's inappropriate to jump in. I just wanted to say that Rep. Sibilia is collecting that data on behalf of the House Technology Committee. If you want to make sure she gets that call.
I will. Yep. Yeah, I didn't know that. I just knew that the agency didn't have it. Thank you. So thank you,
Another
Paul.
thing, thanks, Paul. Another point you had asked about were what reentry might look like. It does not make sense for me to put in place plans and then dump it in Andy's lap. So Andy Skarzinski is going to be overseeing that whole process. Andy, I don't know if there's something you want to say regarding that.
I'll be reaching out to the school principals to start, as soon as we start receiving more guidance about what that looks like. I think that we're waiting to hear what the parameters of what the reentry needs to look like. We're looking at, all variables, and taking all those items into consideration with what plans will have to be. It's going to require a lot of flexibility upon other people. And I think we know at this point that there are more questions than we have answers. And so I think it's a piece to be continued, and principals will be receiving phone calls and emails from me shortly to set up times to start gauging a sense of what we're considering and what we'd like to do.
Andy, could you say a little bit about where those parameters are being developed? Who's doing, or who's sort of establishing them?
Well, I think to me, we're going to take the guidance from the AOE and from the DPH to say what needs to be taken into consideration. There's so many different aspects and elements of this, and we had conversation with the secondary school leaders earlier this week they brought up concerns that we hadn't really even thought about staging areas and the health offices, for instances, or what happens when we have, what's the requirement around face masks and those pieces. So I think we're still looking for more guidance on that, and we'll keep an eye on what's coming out from the AOE and the DPH before we would establish those items.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Lyle, before we go on, I just want to see if there are any questions in regard to what Andy said or Paul or what you said earlier. Or comments, don't have to be questions. Oh, okay, thank you. Go ahead, Lyle.
And I think the last thing you specifically asked for are what we're considering, knowing that in the fall, things probably will not be school as we have always known it in the past. So right now we're looking at what online tools are working best for our needs, how we're offering enrichment and extra support, how we're providing for mental health needs, how we're integrating more outside experiences with the regular classroom expectations, and really what professional development teachers will need if distance learning becomes more of the norm than not. So right now, those are sort of top of our list, but every time we meet, we are really looking at, okay, is this working? If not, what is it that we need to do to ensure that we help mitigate any of the issues that we're having? We know, for instance, Deb just talked a little bit about the vernal pools and getting kids outside. As the weather starts to get nice, we're going to need to put more and more of that into place. Guilford has a long tradition of place-based learning. I know they're doing some work right now, so being able to share what's working around that and put more of that into place in the coming weeks for us, and then as we enter again next year. I think that's it.
Great. Do you want to do the hirings and
Sure,
retirements?
we can
at this
do that.
point? Great. Great.
We have had one resignation, Kate Billings, the music teacher. I put art, but it's music teacher at Oak Grove. She's moving out of the area. So that's our only resignation. And Oak Grove and Dummerston worked together to hire an art teacher that they will be sharing. Alexandra McBride. Dummerston has a new pre-K teacher, Molly Oglesby. Academy had a request to move an academic support teacher from a classroom to an academic support position. That's Tess Peterson. And Guilford also has an internal position transfer from 4-5 to 5-6 in 6th grade homeroom, and that's Amy Skolnick.
And we don't need them to take any action on those, I don't think.
I don't know unless you want to accept them as a.
Well, I have Emily Murphy-Core has a question first, so let's see what that is.
My question was actually not on the resignations or the transfers, but it was on your comment on Guilford has put in place some place-based education and perhaps potential expansions or just considering that as an option for the fall. So I guess I wanted to just know, what do you mean by place-based education?
Sure, I'll ask John if he wants to talk about that a little bit. They've been working on that for years. So.
Youngest grades, we've started a project around beaver habitat. And so creating, using Google Earth to create maps, to send out information to parents and to suggest activities, spots to go in town, to note where there is known beaver habitat, guidelines around when you're viewing wildlife, and ways to report back what you've discovered. And so we're using that as a way of a collaborative crowdsourcing technique to create a map of where there are beaver in the town and what we find out in terms of wildlife behavior and activity.
Thank you, John. Hey, could I have a motion to accept with regret the resignation of Kate Billings, the Oak Grove music teacher? You'll have to unmute to move it.
So moved. Emily?
Thank you, Emily. Can I have a second, please?
Anne?
Thank you, Ann. It's been moved and seconded to accept with regret Kate Billings' resignation. All in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 And I'll be happy to have suggestions about how to do that more effectively. Thank you. And now a motion to approve the hiring of Molly Oglesby, Alexandra McBride, Tess Peterson, and internal position transfer of Amy Skolnick. Is that the?
So moved.
Thank you, Liz. Second, please.
Second, Emily?
Thank you, Emily. Moved and seconded to accept the new hires as presented. All those in favor, please again unmute and say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? I forgot to ask about that. Great, then the motion is passed. Thank you. So, Lyle, I believe that's it. Okay, next is the financial stability, an update, and maybe a conversation about the funds that we know are available to schools and others might be coming, and anything else around finances that we want to talk about. Frank, do you have a report for us?
Sure, I can give you an update on, there was a presentation by Secretary French, Mark Perrault from the Joint Fiscal Office, and Ryan McLaren on Wednesday. This was a Zoom conference coordinated by the Vermont Superintendents Association. David, I don't know, did you have a chance to join that?
I did, yes.
Okay, so I thought I would do just a kind of a quick overview of that. I think that's our most recent update. Is that going to be workable?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be relatively brief on that, but happy to try to answer any questions. So there was about they said 250 folks that signed up for this briefing from Peter Welch's office. That's Ryan McLaren presented, and then Mark Perrault from Joint Fiscal Office, along with, as he said, the Agency of Ed Secretary Dan French, basically giving us an overview of the progress on the CARES Act, maybe getting right to the point that you're raising, David, in terms of availability of funds and when are they going to, allow us to start utilizing those. Dan French indicated that they're working on that guidance this week and should be coming. But at this point, the good news is that the state application for approximately $30 million for Vermont Public Ed has been approved, but they don't have a timeline. So that's a very important piece. Obviously, Dan French indicated he wasn't sure if this funding was going to be available for this fiscal year or next, but on the on the positive side, it's definitely coming our way, and it's a matter of getting it into the systems that allow schools to apply for them, and then be accountable for the criteria. Speaking of the criteria, I don't think that we saw specifics in the briefing, but I did go to the CARES Act law. If any of you wanted to go to the Congress site and refer to the CARES Act, there in a very kind of a quick summary of the types of spending that we are expecting to be authorized. I'll just give you, there's 12 criteria listed in the law. I'll give you a couple of highlights. Specifically, this money is for the coordination preparedness of response efforts for the educational institutions. So that, very broad opportunity there to use of funds. They get specific, like things like providing principals and other school leaders with resources necessary to address the needs of individual schools, and then they have quite a number of priorities, but none of these seem to be exclusive criteria. Things like activities to address the unique needs of low-income students with disabilities, English language learners, and so on. There's specifically criteria for training and professional development for the staff, specifics around using it for sanitizing facilities and addressing safety issues. There's also specific references to purchasing technology, including software, hardware for connectivity to facilitate the online learning. There's a reference to mental health services and supports, summer learning, after school programs. And then there's the last criteria out of this list of 12 is that it's very nice to see that there's a catch-all other activities that are necessary to maintain an operation, the continuity of services in local education agencies, and continuing to employ existing staff of the local education agency. So those that's encouraging that it appears that there's a pretty wide range of anticipated uses of the funds. Ultimately, Dan French said that that the interface will be something like the district states its strategy and objective. The objective is to the use of the funds, the purpose of it, and then the strategy in which to accomplish the objective. That is the format of our Title I application process. So he referred to that as being a similar process, which we are very familiar with. Other updates, there was an update regarding the FY21 education shortfall. Emily, I'm sure you have much more up-to-date information on that, so I won't spend much time on it. If you want to elaborate, that would be great. But essentially what I picked up from Mark is as we go through fiscal year 20 and then look down the road toward fiscal year 21, he referred to a $153 million shortfall in the Ed Fund, and he gave us an example of how that would translate if there are no solutions, which he's not implying that's our state, but he indicated that would be the equivalent of about 22 cents, 23 cents on a school property tax, which is that $230 per 100,000 of assessed value. So folks are working very hard on that gap. There's been a number of recommendations, including one from the Vermont School Business Officials, the organization that I'm part of, which is to try to address that over a multi-year period by considering borrowing to spread the variance between spending and available resources over multiple years. So that's a quick overview. It was interesting to hear there's about 20 questions that were asked out of the audience. Many of them were asking for guidance on do we anticipate the legislature to create spending freezes, salary freezes? Is there any guidance on issuing contracts, those sorts of things? The common answer that I got from the presenters, and it was primarily being answered by Dan French and to some extent Mark Peralt, that those don't seem to be at the forefront of our legislative considerations. In that, and they, Mark in particular emphasized that the vast majority of school budgets have been passed at town meeting. They recognize that that the spending assumptions are tied up with collective bargaining agreements, and that there does not seem to be, a current discussion at the legislative level to consider overriding collective bargaining agreements, which obviously is the vast majority of school spending. So on the other hand, I think we've heard that the current discussion now is between a House version of a way to authorize FY21 budgets versus a Senate approach, which is quite different. So though Dan indicated, his role would be to help try to craft a solution as the legislators consider the path ahead. So I think those were the highlights from what I took away. Nothing definitive, unfortunately. We still have more uncertainties than certainties, but it does look like there is support around the corner. Ryan McLaren referred several times to their work at the federal level for a second support package to be coming, considered and hopefully coming our way. And that includes, I was really pleased to hear, it includes specifically work that you have already talked about tonight, which is expanding broadband access, trying to help fund that. And the other area, which we know is so important, is supporting our food service, on an extended summer program. So those were encouraging points.
I know we have some senators and representatives here, David. I don't know if you want to recognize them.
Well, I think Frank gave a really comprehensive report. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent. It's more than 20 over the last week or so watching meetings where this was a part of the agenda or not a part of the agenda, but influenced by, and hearing reports by the people that he mentioned and a couple of others about the budget and the shortfalls and the 1.25 billion and the 30 million. And I'm just astonished at how thoroughly you presented that. I'd like to hear questions for Frank from the board. Emily Murphy-Carr had her hand up, and I guess she got tired of holding it up. So, but any questions for Frank from the board? Or from the representatives or senators present? Emily, go ahead.
I know that Senator Belton and I both need to go right around 7 o'clock. We only had an hour, so I'm sorry about that. And I know that Representative Burke is one screen away from me and also on this call. And Senator White tried valiantly to get in and had some sort of technology glitch where she got stuck in the waiting room, but wanted you all to know that she cares really deeply about all of you and this issue and wanted to be here tonight. Would you like an update on sort of the 3 categories that we've been talking about this? Would that be helpful at this point in the meeting? Following from what Frank said?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm not sure what you're going to say, so go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just want to, before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge that what is sort of happening in our school districts right now is going to result in increased needs next year. And I think most people in the Senate and the House are aware of that. And I think your delegation is very much aware of that. And we want to make sure that everyone has the resources they need to take care of, we can call it the achievement gap, we can call it the technology gap, we can, time, whatever it is, but that we need to have the resources to handle those challenges. And from where I sit, which is very different from where Senator Ballant sits, and I absolutely don't want to speak for the Senate, that we are not talking about any austerity measures at this time. We're really talking about ways that we can fill the gap in the ed fund to make sure that people are getting their needs met. And so the 2 things it seems like have come up so far is the challenge with the FY21 budget and how to get that passed or not passed, and the shortfall in the ed fund, and wondered if you want to start with those, Senator, or if you'd like me to.
Well, we're gonna talk about the difference between the two, the House and the Senate proposals. So if it might make sense to focus on the ed fund.
So you don't want to hear?
No, I've got a whole presentation about that. It's marginal to what we're actually going to have to do tonight. But I would love to hear about the ed fund.
Okay. There's a shortfall in the ed fund. It's substantial. If we filled it through the regular yield bill, we would have property taxes that are unsustainable and unachievable for most Vermonters. And so we are looking at a wide variety of other solutions, some of them including the CARES Act, some of them don't, and I don't have anything definitive to say about that at this time. Senator Ballot?
Like Emily, so she sits on Ways and Means in the House side, I sit on Finance, and I will just echo what she said. There is no interest in austerity measures at this point, but in terms of what we can and can't use the CARES Act money for, it's still very much up for debate. I was in contact with folks in the Joint Fiscal Office today about another issue related to the CARES Act, and we are still getting guidance from the federal government about this, and very much engaged with our federal delegations to have a lot more flexibility. But right now, we're really concentrating on this, what we're calling the skinny bill, getting through the budget for this year. Probably will not be able to settle the budget up for next year and the yield bill until the end of August.
So Becca, does that mean we won't know what our tax rate will be until August?
That's possible.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts or concerns about the financial stability and about the current situation? Yeah, Frank. Yes.
Yeah, David, if I could ask either Emily or Becca, good to hear that same theme about no proposed spending cuts from this FY21, given most budgets are passed, and avoiding the austerity approach. Unfortunately, though, you're aware that that the Senate version of the current road ahead for this district, given we don't have an approved budget, would result in a $2 million reduction, because my understanding is that the Senate version is pointed toward fiscal year 20 education spending. And I just wanted to take a moment to reiterate how incompatible that is, given where this district has come from. I'm sure you know, having failed a merger vote and then being in the forced merger group, and we didn't have a public vote until June 26 of 2019 to become a new district 4 days later, July 1st, 2019. My point is that the fiscal year 20 education spending is the basis of that is all around separate districts, a completely different configuration than a merged district. And I know we're not alone in the state, and that's why that is such an unworkable solution. That would be a severe austerity program for this region.
Frank,
Thank you, Frank. I'd rather, Becca, I'd rather we not talk about that. We're going to talk about our annual meeting and all of the options, including those things. And I'd rather not, I kind of wish Frank hadn't gone as far to make that pitch as well. We need to focus on what we're going to do. And
well,
what
so
the
the
legislature is going to do is really
Chair,
unknown.
The question is, Mr. Chair, do you want to hear directly from the Ed Committee in the Senate to explain why we are where we are? Is that helpful?
I'm not sure. I can poll the board later on. That may come out of the conversation when we get to the question about our annual meeting. Other questions on the financial sustainability topic? Okay, committee reports. Has the Finance Committee met?
No, the Finance Committee has not met, but we did, I polled all the directors and got some questions and vetted the questions through Frank. They came back pretty comprehensively. And so I think we're ready to go ahead and pass the warrants and payroll as published.
Great. Thank you. That system seems to be working well, sending the questions ahead of time. You're not getting a lot of them except for me and you, but I'm glad it's working. Personnel Committee has a meeting coming up on Friday.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Yes, we have a meeting scheduled on Friday.
And a very brief agenda from what I saw.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Policy and Amendment Committee has not met. We have some new members. And so when we do meet, we're going to try and draw the old members back in to do an orientation for that, but we have not met yet. The Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee. Emily, can you give us an update? We have a plan in there.
Yes, so we met last week, and the main things that we discussed, first we uploaded all our new members, and then and kind of coordinated things. And then the two main discussion topics were, one, how to move forward the after-school programming presentation, which I believe is on our next agenda.
Yes.
So at the next programmatic meeting, which is next Wednesday, we'll be finalizing that. I still have to send out actually the final copy, but we'll be finalizing that, and then we'll have a nice presentation for you all, which we'll be giving. So that's one of the big updates. The other update is there was a kind of an equity in sports conversation and document that was shared with us. So we're now in the process of reviewing that. And, you know, we've kind of broken out into little teams, and we're going to propose back to the larger committee, because I think we're a committee of 6 right now, propose back to the larger committee, maybe some things we'd like to look into or recommendations that we'd like to explore a little bit further, which we then can agree upon and then bring to the full board.
Great. Any questions for Emily? And we'll have a nice slideshow and presentation at our next meeting. Climate Crisis Task Force has not met. Thomas, is there a plan to?
Yeah, we plan both for diversity and for the Climate Crisis Task Force. I'm aiming for Tuesday. I was just about to email everybody to see if they're free. That's the plan. Tuesday or early next week.
Great, thank you. Communications Council tried to reconvene and found out the only time we could meet was the same time as the supervisory union meeting, and 2 of the members of the council are on the supervisory union, so we're going to have to meet again next week. We wanted to get some information out about the John Sessions shared some of the data about the food program, and also we're going to be, depending on what we decide as far as rescheduling the annual meeting, we're going to need to do a lot of communicating around that. So that group will be busy starting next week. Diversity and Equity Committee has not met. There have been a number of webinars in district and in state and beyond about the effects of distance learning and coronavirus on equity of opportunity for students, and I'm kind of reviewing them, and I recommend that we watch some of them. And the SU board will meet on Friday. And Carrie, do you have anything to say about the agenda?
Sorry, took me a minute. The agenda for Friday, I think I'm looking at it now. Actually, it's not, it's pretty basic. I almost feel, knock on wood, that the SU and you SU members are going to kill me if this doesn't come to pass, might be getting back to our 4 to 5 meetings a year. So I think it's a pretty regular agenda. We've got minutes to catch up on. We've got warrants and payroll to catch up on. We've got some resignations and leave request issues, and then we are working on the continuous improvement plan. So that's about it.
Right, and we'll have a report for the next meeting on that. Okay, so that brings us to the leadership councils. I know that, let's see, Putney is meeting and Guilford met. Sean, you want to tell us a little bit about the Guilford meeting? I think we're going to get to their questions later in this meeting.
Yeah, we met on the 1st last Friday, and was well attended. As always, I think there were about 8 of us there, 8 or 9, and a lot of energy. So they had reports on what was going on at the Guilford School. John spoke quite a bit about the budget, and John gave a pretty comprehensive sort of overview of what's happening in the school, participation of students, and some of the challenges that teachers faced. And it was, once again, it was an excellent meeting. And yeah, that's about it.
Great, thank you. Did any other councils convene since our last meeting? Okay, I'll just remind that we established we assigned board members to those councils, and one of the things we want to be doing is convening them and getting their participation in the processes that are to come. Some of a lot of the funding that's coming from the federal government requires a high level of participation, public participation and involvement in the planning and in the actions that come from spending that money. So we need to get these councils up and running. So that brings us to, I think, probably the meat of this meeting. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was raising my
hand
before you moved on. Dummerston did meet. We had our first meeting since the closure and just sort of got back together, looked at our goals again. We'll be meeting every other Thursday at 6. So that's our new schedule while we have to meet virtually.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, the hands run off the bottom of my screen and I hadn't scrolled in a while. So, but thank you for that update. Let me just look and see if there are any more up. Any other leadership council comments? Okay, so we have to determine what we want to do about our annual meeting and our budget, and how we want to proceed. And what I've done, I prepared some notes from information that we gathered this week. Lyle contacted the Secretary of State, and I think the agency as well, got a number of responses, and which clarified a bunch of questions. And then there are a bunch of details that we just have to pay attention to. So I'm going to put this memo up, and you give me just a second. I almost pushed the wrong button. So I'm going to share this information and then kind of go through it with you. You should be able to see something that says May 6 notes, annual meeting. It says it must be warned before May 16th. So right off the bat, I have to correct that. We actually have to warn it 40 days before, between 30 and 40 days before the actual vote. So that would move it 4 or 5 days further into May. So we could actually meet again before we warn the meeting, assuming we want to get it in before, assuming we want to have the meeting or schedule a vote on our budget. If we want to have it in before the 1st of July. Then that's not absolutely required. We don't have to do that, but it would be wise, I think, if we're going to have a vote, to have it before then, so we would know what's going to happen. This is the only thing we really have control over, the actions of the House and the Senate, and if they are able to come to an agreement, whatever that is really out of our hands, or primarily out of our hands at this time. So the first question that we asked of the Secretary of State was, can we reschedule the annual meeting at a school board meeting? And yes, we can. We can cancel it, and then we can take steps to notify the electorate for when we're going to have a vote, if we're going to have a vote, or if we choose to reschedule it. And then there's a question about our articles, which say that the vote has to come from the floor. And the Secretary of State changed that, got permission to change those regulations. And so we can decide to move all of the articles that have to be voted, the borrowing and spending of money, the accepting of grants, and then our budget and the other articles that go on the warning can be voted from the floor. We can change it to, it's supposed to be voted from the floor, but we can change that to Australian ballot under the emergency measures that are currently in place. So then the question becomes, do we want, and please, if you have any questions, just say, I can't see the list of people, so I won't be able to see your hand. So I'm just going to read through these other two things, and then we'll go back to questions. But I checked with the Brattleboro Town Clerk about voting. How would it happen? What would it cost? What could we do? And not surprising, because this is exactly what she said the first time I asked her about this a couple of months ago, is that finding poll workers and counters and keeping them safe is the primary concern of having in-person voting. Particularly with our board of civil authority in Brattleboro, they're like me, they're in the high risk category, and they're really not, they don't want to have to work the polls. A lot of logistics would have to be worked out in order to make it happen. She also talked to the town manager, and I'm forgetting his last name, from the Secretary of State's office, who's been very helpful through this entire process. And the municipal center would not be available in Brattleboro. And so we would have to use, I'm not sure if that's true, if the town halls are open in the other towns or not, but most of them are locked, and they have one staff person at a time. So it would be very difficult to manage an election with people coming inside. So she talked about a gym or a large space where you can come in and out the exit to make the needs for physical distancing easier. And the doors could be open so people wouldn't even have to touch the doors. But again, the governor's orders about social distancing, the number of people allowed in, we'd have to comply with those. We can rewarn it with a 30 to 40 day time frame. And if we voted it on say June 30th, which happens to be a Tuesday, and it failed, then we could revote it with a 7-day warning. So we could revote it again. We could just make some reductions or whatever we decide to do, and then revote it again in the next week. And those are all the things that we have to do under the current law. Again, if the legislature changes it, we may not have to vote, but if we do have to vote, and the decision we have to make tonight, we can now, because it's a 40-day, not 45-day. We can wait until our next meeting, which would be the 20th is too late. We have to decide tonight whether we're going to rewarn the annual meeting or schedule a vote. We have to, if we don't have a budget, and we don't, and unless the legislature tells us we can have one between now and June 1st, we won't have one. And our contract, our negotiated agreement with both employee groups says that if we're going to be reducing any positions, any reductions in force, people must be informed by June 1st if we don't have a budget, and we don't. So there are three options that are in front of us. Again, only one that we actually have any control over. One is to put our proposed budget to a vote, to the voters, to take it to the voters. The other is and again, we don't have any control over this. The two proposals are from the Senate, and you've heard a little bit about this earlier in the meeting. The Senate is supporting, the Senate Ed Committee unanimously and strongly is supporting approving our last year's spending, and Frank clearly articulated the problems with that the way that budget was built, rather than a budget for this current structure, this current system. They will approve that. The legislature will approve that, and then if we want to have a vote and try and get our proposed budget, we can do that. The estimate is that that system of approving the FY20 spending for all of the 19 districts that don't have budgets, apparently it's reported or estimated that it saves the Ed Fund $17 million. And then on the House side, the House Ed Committee just yesterday scheduled talking about a draft of a bill, and they scheduled it very late. It wasn't on the agenda in the morning, so I didn't even know what happened until today, and I was able to watch most of it. But they're proposing, as I think Frank described, approving the proposed budgets, particularly for districts like us who had our meetings scheduled but couldn't hold them, approving our proposed budget. And it's estimated that that would cost the education fund $17 million. So that's a part of the dissension, is that the amount of money that's involved. But that's not the whole. There are many more parts to the puzzle. But that's the disagreement. If they are unable to come to agreement, and I'm going to hold back on editorializing or any comments at all on what I think might happen or is happening, and I would ask other people too that may have history or war stories about dealing with the legislature to sort of hold those and try to address just our current decision, which is whether or not to hold a vote. But the current law was designed, it's a bridge loan kind of a law, designed for budgets that were voted down and maybe voted down a second or third time, and now it's July 1st and the district needs some money. They need to borrow. And what it does is add together all of the grants, the federal grant, I'm not sure what all of them are, but federal grants, any money that's coming into the district that's not coming out of the Ed Fund, that's from other revenue sources. And it also requires us to put all of our reserves together and then subtract that from our whatever we have for that at this moment, subtract that from our FY20 spending total, and then we can borrow 87% of the remainder. So we take out, and I think that's around $42 million. So we would be voting on, that would be less based on the I don't know how many millions of dollars of grants, and I'm not specific about the reserves, but we would get way less than the $40,000 that we are currently, or $40 million that we are currently spending. And we also would have exhausted our reserve funds. We can vote as many times as it takes to get a budget. If we are stuck with this and we put our budget before the voters and reduce it and have a vote, and it's rejected, then we would reduce a little more and have another budget, another vote, and go on until we passed something, and that would determine our spending for the next year. So that's, let me unshare that now and have a look at the, so that's kind of the where we are, and I wanted to kind of go through the facts of the situation, what we can do, and what we can't do, and what the limitations are, and what the law says, so we wouldn't have to spend a lot of time talking about that, and kind of try to get to the question of, do we want to, what do we want to do? Do we want to schedule a vote? Do we want to wait for the legislature to decide? Do we, looking at I think it was $159 million deficit for next year, do we think that the legislature is do we think we know what the legislature might do? So that's the background. That's the situation we are in, as best I can present it right now. I would welcome any comments from Frank or Lyle or Andy, or anybody, any other administrators that have other insights. So I don't see, Sean, I know has his hand up, and I just wanted to see if Frank or Lyle had anything to add. So Sean, go ahead. You have a comment or question?
Well, I was just wondering, we have 3 representatives here. And I was really hoping, I mean, they came to the meeting, they offered to give information, and so far they haven't been able to speak. And I think it would be very appropriate if they had a chance to tell us some of the information that they have.
I'm not sure who is still here.
I think they've left. I think they said they had a 7
They all
o'clock
had another
meeting.
meeting, yeah. And I also think it's important, Sean, for us to not hear, I mean, I don't want to hear explanations about why the legislature thinks what they think. I think these are the proposals, they're very clear, and what we have to do is decide what are we going to do in the face of this uncertainty, and we have to make a decision tonight. Yeah, Frank, please.
Yeah, Dave, thanks for that overview. The three scenarios, the proposed budget to the voters, yes or no, that's your decision tonight. The wait and react to the legislative outcome. And then the third, I just wanted to comment on the third scenario. I think you described it, the way I understand it in the statute. I just wanted to be clear that the 87% borrowing option, it's purely a cash flow mechanism, and your general calculations were consistent with the annual report, David. We are a typical district where we receive 13% of our funding from tuition and various other forms of aid, and then we typically receive 87% of our budget through the ed fund. That's what the 42 million is out of our $50 million budget. I just wanted to clarify for the board, when you're considering the three options that David has described, set a date tonight, wait and react to the education committees, or delay till July 1st, knowing that we would trigger the opportunity to borrow 87% of our current budget. But with that, knowing that we would pursue a public vote process until the voters do provide us with a approved budget. My own sense is that I think that if the legislature doesn't take action before June 1st, then the board, I would encourage the board to move forward with setting a date under whatever conditions that we have to deal with in terms of public health. But I would recommend that we do wait to see if there is a baseline that the legislature sets up for us that we think is workable. If we move ahead before that, I think that we'll put a lot of resources into dealing with the public health issues around having a meeting and all of those things you described, David, around the capacity of town clerks and town offices to deal with the situation. So that's why I'm recommending that you consider letting the legislative process unfold. But if it doesn't provide us clarity by the end of the month, June 1st, then we pick this thing back up, because I really think we need to have an approved budget, and if the legislature is not going to take action, we'll put all kinds of other problems into motion if we continue with no budget into August and September. It wreaks havoc on retaining our employees and making the proper commitments that we need to operate the schools.
Thank you, Frank. I think that's an excellent recommendation and excellent perspective. I'm going to hear from other people. Lyle, please.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Frank and think that thinking about June, if we can even this evening set a date in June, that way we can still have a couple of weeks to determine whether or not find out whether or not the legislature is going to do anything, and have a little bit of time for us to continue to work on if it's safe to have any type of vote, what the costs of an fully Australian ballot would be, look at every single option that we might have to have a vote.
Thank you. Any board members, questions from Liz?
The Australian ballot kind of scares me because, you know, everybody's having a hard time now, and if people don't come to a meeting so that we can explain the budget, it just seems to me like they're going to say, oh, that's too much money. No. I don't know if anybody else is thinking that way. Or could we set the meeting up so that if that we would hold it in person if the guidelines from the state at that time could be met? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, again, we don't know. That's part of the problem. Is we don't know what the next situation is going to bring. And the point about it being a different time in terms of trying to pass a budget, that's been a major part of the conversation in the legislature. And on one side, it's really unfair for us to have to pass a budget under different conditions that everybody else passed it under. And we're going to start this new world at a deficit. So there's an inequity there. And then the other side of it is that, well, everybody's going to be suffering, so you might as well start now. But again, I think it's not, well, I'm going to hear from more people. Other board members? Oh, Mark Spino, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I just simply wanted to state that I agree with and support Frank's recommendation that he just wanted to, for the record.
Great, thank you.
I have a question, David.
Yes.
I believe there was a communication that you had with I forget if it was the Brattleboro clerk about doing voting by mail as a hybrid. It would be if we could find a way to have an in-person safe meeting, we could also get votes by people from mail. Is that what the idea was with that?
It's pretty broad, and I know Lyle's looked at these documents too. So if you have anything to add, please do. There are a couple of the clearest option is to have in-person voting where people come through and vote in person. You can supplement that by having absentee ballots as well. Mm-hmm. You could also mail ballots with return envelopes to everybody in the district and have an Australian ballot that way.
Right.
So there's a lot of flexibility in how, or we could put tents up all over the football field and set up the public address system and have everybody in masks 10 feet apart, and people running around with microphones on poles so nobody would touch them, and and try and have a participatory meeting in July. I mean, there's just a bunch of different things. But what Liz said about maybe having people that rather than being better, it might actually be worse in August. We really have no idea what's going to happen. There's reliable information is not yet available in terms of where this is going.
I guess part of what my question was, if we had some sort of absentee or vote by mail, what are the downsides of that aside from, I believe we would have to pay the postage and mailing fees, of course, for however many thousands of households. Is there another downside that I'm not seeing? Because that's a cost, but it has to be done, and we have to make it as safe as possible. Maybe it's just worth the money.
That would be the safest way, for sure.
I mean, is there another downside that I'm not seeing aside from cost?
The only thing that I've heard is bringing in the people to count the ballots.
Right. Yeah.
And that's we again would have to make that as safe as possible.
Well, I hear the for the information we know that the virus only lives on paper for 24 hours, as far as we know. We could have people vote at different people counting at different locations at least 24 hours after the thing comes in.
Yeah, leave the ballots out in the sun all day and then count them the next day.
Like we do with our groceries.
Yeah. Yeah, there are.
I don't know. That sounds like the safest, even though it's not immediate and it's not perfect. But then again, how do we do any sort of in-person? You know, the people who want to show up in person, who want to debate it that way.
Yeah, and I think there's a question about, you know, and there are people of a certain age group. I won't say what it is, but that are would be very unlikely to come.
Right.
And so anyway, other thoughts or other considerations? We, based on Frank's recommendation, we don't actually have to. We wouldn't have to do anything tonight, really. If we could wait till, or we could schedule a vote and for late in June, and then cancel it if we didn't need to have it. That might be the most prudent way to go forward, and then work out at least theoretically work out the details of that between now and the 1st of June. Frank?
I just wanted to mention as a reminder, we all remember, most of us were there, June 26th, right? We voted on the current budget, and we were able to turn that around into a pretty typical school tax rate in mid-July. It took a lot of work to get there, because that's way beyond the normal calendar. The normal calendar is the state collects budgets in June 1st. It goes to the tax department. They merge it with the legislative indices around school funding, and it goes to select boards by July 1st. You know, we did a remarkable job last year of having a vote on June 26th and still getting data to the tax department, and then they working with town officials to get tax bills out under a pretty normal cycle. So that's why I was suggesting, if we don't have a direction or a base plan from the legislature by June 1st, then we take matters in our own hands and we move along. And I think that, you know, given the 40-day requirement, or as you're talking about, Thomas and David, about a mail-in option, you know, these are things that I would think we would be in a little better position to make an informed decision on a month from now. One last thing, you know, David, you've mentioned, Lyle's mentioned, June 1st is our RIF date. So, you know, if we don't hear from the legislature, or if the school board, you know, decides to wait for more developments, then, you know, the administration, of course, will have to take responsibility for the reduction in force, you know, preparedness, you know, and that's Thomas, you know, that's probably, you're asking what are the trade-offs. You know, that's a big one, in that, you know, if the legislature doesn't give us direction by, let's say, May, you know, 30th, then that creates that uncertainty that no one likes in a public school system.
And Beekman?
Yeah, just to clarify.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Thomas.
Just to clarify, what I was talking about was not the downside of not having the budget passed in time. Just the downside of mailing voting. That's all. If there was a downside to the technical, we don't want to not have a budget passed. Yeah, I understand.
Great, thank you. Ann Beekman?
Thank you, Frank, for your recommendation, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. Having listened to the Senate Ed Committee today, I'm pretty clear on what their position will be, and I don't imagine that will not be influential with the rest of the Senate. Consequently, I agree with Lyle in that I think we should schedule something, whether we need to use it or not.
Great, thank you, Ann.
I just had one more idea. Sorry, if somebody else wants to talk first. I'm talking now.
Tim Maceo?
Oh, I wasn't going to speak, but I agree with the notion that first, we should not meet in person. I think that's untenable given the situation. But I would be for a public virtual discussion followed by an absentee ballot with ballots being mailed out to all the voters in the district and simply doing it absentee.
Thank you.
That was what I was just going to say. That's a great idea.
Great minds. Emily, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on this?
No, I mean, what Thomas and Tim and everybody else has kind of just said, I think is reasonable. I like the idea, as Anne said too, and Lyle, of scheduling something. I don't like the idea of moving too far into close to that July 1st date and not having, having had a vote. So.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Kelly, do you have any thoughts to share?
I'm just agreeing with what everyone else is saying.
Oh, great. And Michelle?
Hi. I also agree that we need to schedule a vote. I'm just curious, some of the correspondence we saw with the clerk, maybe just brainstorming ideas of voting, like there was an idea of a drive-through voting that could be, people could stay in their cars and then people can request absentee ballots. And I'm wondering how much influence do we have over how the vote, how a vote would happen in our community versus leaving it up to the individual towns?
That's the question that
It's a school district, so the towns, they kind of, I mean, they can choose not to do it for us. The town clerks are not required to handle our elections. They just kind of,
they're just helping to oversee it.
Yeah, and we would certainly want to negotiate with them what makes the most sense.
Okay, so there's still room for discussion on how we would do the vote.
And Frank or Lyle, is there any more information about how we interact with the town clerks that might be helpful?
I have not. Usually Barb is the one to reach out.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
So that's what we always say. We'll just turn it over to Barb and it'll come out right. Yeah. And Sean, you've been waiting a long time, but I wanted to give everybody a chance to speak.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I reached out to our town clerk, and she was pretty reluctant for a number of reasons to have a vote, doing the all by ballot. You still have to have the BOC there, the BCA, and there are a lot of older people there. And then, because you do have to, even if you do a mail vote, you have to have the availability of people being able to drop their ballots off in person. So that I reached out to Hillary, and she said that they can't happen in the municipal center as of now. So it just seemed to me that it's pretty risky, I think, for vulnerable populations to be doing such a thing in public. So I would agree with Frank and Lyle and Mark in that if we waited, then we wouldn't have to wouldn't have to start getting the ballots, which is probably a pretty significant cost. And hope that the legislature comes through and satisfies what we need to have happen, which I personally think there's a good possibility. I've talked a great deal with Sarah Coffey. I've written to Kate Webb, and I have written to Emily, and there seems to be a lot of cooperation. And so that would be one of the tenets of being on the school board, is collaboration. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Emily?
So I just wanted to clarify, Sean, I didn't really understand what you were saying. So you're in agreement with Frank. Are you in agreement with everybody, or did Frank and Lyle say something different that I didn't understand about waiting for the vote? I had thought that they had also suggested early June.
Can I speak?
Yeah, sure. Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Frank had said that initially that if we wouldn't have to do something tonight, but that we could do it at the next meeting and then give the legislature a chance to hopefully make a resolution. So I was agreeing at that moment. Lyle agreed with what Frank had said, and then Mark Spino also agreed with what Lyle said. So I'm going back to that original statement by Frank that was agreed by Lyle and Mark.
Well, I think in a minute we'll be able to clarify all that, because I'm going to ask for a motion unless if there are no further comments or thoughts. I think we sort of have a consensus. So I wonder if I could have a motion to, well, maybe we should talk a little bit about when we want to tentatively schedule it, because we still would have to warn it, even if we don't have the vote, if we want to schedule it now, and then rescind the decision on June 1st, or by June 1st if we don't hear from them. We need to choose a date. I had suggested June 30th because it's a Tuesday, which is a typical election day, but it sounds like we'll be looking for more of a mail-in vote sort of a format if we go that way. But do we want to select a date, and then I'll ask for a motion to schedule a Australian ballot on our meeting warning, our articles? June 30th seems like a reasonable, it's the last day before July 1st.
What if we have the June 30th date? Would we have to have everything counted and certified by the July 1st morning? Because it might not give us enough time.
That we probably, if nothing else happens, the state is going to give us the authority to borrow as of July 1st,
Right.
Under the current statute, to borrow up to 87%.
So we'd be doing that
yeah,
temporarily.
we'd do it. Yeah, and then we would have it approved. We could do it a day or two sooner. It really, that might be smarter to do it a few days.
Hey.
Emily?
So is that from what I understood, there were some negatives about doing it on June 30th. Is that, given the regulations around 40 days notice, it seems like that's not the earliest date we could do. Is that correct?
Right. The earliest date would be for us to warn it tomorrow, which would be the 6th, and that leaves, or 7th. So that leaves 24 days in May, and we would need another 16 days. So the earliest we could do it would be the 16th of June. So anytime after the 16th of June.
Is that better for, I mean, because we had talked a little bit about the effect, meaning of having such a short turnaround time on getting together all the taxes and also, letting teachers know and all this kind of stuff. Is it better, in the opinion of the administration, for it to be earlier?
Well, I'll offer a thought, and then we'll query the administration. If we did it on the 16th or earlier, we wouldn't have much time after the 1st to do the arrangements to get the balloting done. That wouldn't give the town clerks much time to get for the ballots to be printed and mailed out or anything along those lines.
The rainbow.
Nancy?
Hi. As somebody who lives in a district that has regularly not passed their school budget, I will tell you that the longer we wait, the more good teachers we will lose. So your best teachers will end up going to districts that are looking to hire, because they won't be willing to take the risk of waiting. And I worry about the attrition and what that does to our students as they're coming back, having been out of school this long, and how long it will be by the time we get to August and September.
Lyle?
So I believe Emily had asked something about teacher contracts. Our deadline is June 1st. So this discussion is not going to, we're not going to have a budget in place by June 1st unless we were to have the meeting as scheduled in May. What will happen is that we will have to make some decisions based on the information that we have around the last week of May, and then either send letters of intent or RIF letters, depending upon what we're thinking might happen. Our best guesses with the budget at that point.
Any other thoughts about what date to schedule the vote? Or is there a consensus that we just not schedule it and wait and see what happens? And, and maybe vote in July. As Lyle said, we're not going to have a budget in time to not have to send out the notices. It's just a question of whether we'll know how many we have to send out. So what's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to hear more from Nancy about the threat of teachers moving to other districts. Is that?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah.
Sure. So what I know from experience is that Springfield historically has a hard time passing budgets. And in a traditional year without the impact of COVID-19, usually we've had, we're on our way into, by this time in the year, we're on our way into at least the second vote. By the time we would move to a third or a fourth vote, which we've done in the past, teachers would be actively job hunting because you will either have given them a letter of intent, which they will hopefully stay waiting for a contract, or you've given them a RIF notice. And if you've given them a RIF notice, you have in effect said there's a very good chance you will not have a job. So some of the people you're losing in that situation is your youngest and best talent. And you may be in a situation, if the budget passes, that you could rehire them, but they may have already accepted a new job. So I am just saying to you that the longer you wait to pass a budget, the more you're asking them to wait in limbo. And I'm already writing letters of recommendation for some of the young teachers that are at the Career Center. And I don't know about other administrators, but I know people are really worried about losing their jobs. And some of the people we're potentially going to lose are really great teachers. So that would be my only input.
So I'd like to not have dialogue if we could.
Okay.
Hear from other people. You can obviously speak again.
No, that's fine.
See if anybody else wants to comment on this. The only thing I would say is that we're going to try and send as few RIFs as possible. And that's the last place we're going to be looking. Although we have to obviously look at that. It's the last place we're going to be looking. Michelle, please.
Yep, I'm just thinking about the date and the date that you threw out, June 30th. And I believe I saw that if we were to do 100% absentee ballot, those have to be mailed out to voters 14 days, no less than 14 days before the vote. So I think that time crunch really is important to note if we're going from June 1st, and it would have to be mailed out really by the end of the second week of June. That's June 30th might be the best we can do.
Thank you. Kelly?
I just want to say that, I mean, I'm really conflicted on all these options, but the sooner we can do it, I would say that's better. That's whatever it appears to be.
Thanks. So we are unresolved here. Mark.
What about Tuesday, June 16th? And just to also want to say, one thing we have going for us with our teachers is that we have a history of a very stable school system and towns that really value education and have always supported us. And we're just stuck in a really unique situation, worldwide pandemic.
Yep. Well put. Tim?
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, what I'm hearing is that Michelle's comment about having to mail spend the money to purchase and then mail out the absentee ballots or the mail-in ballots. And we haven't decided that's what we're going to do, but we need to consider that. With a stamped self-addressed return envelope in them would have to be done if we did do Tuesday the 16th or anywhere in that third week of June. We would have 2 days after June 1st to get those all printed and sent out, or we'd have to invest in them before we knew what was going to happen. And we could if it's important to have it early, the vote as early as possible, we could say we're going to decide finally on June 1st, but we'd have to find out when do we have to order those from the printer and get them to the postal service. So we might have to start, say, a week before June 1st, purchase those ballots. That would be a way to avoid that crunch. But again, I don't have a sense of whether sooner or later is a consensus. So maybe we should have a motion, and then we can vote on it and decide which way we're going to do it.
Well, I was going to say, looking at the calendar for June, if we have to make up our mind on Monday the 1st, Friday is the 5th. That would give us a full week to get, that's still a short amount of time, but that would give us a full working week to get everything together and prepared to deliver to the post office. And then we could have a date of June 19th, a Friday, for the actual election. That gives us 2 weeks, but it gives us 1 week of preparing in June, right in the middle of the month. And then if we need a revote, we have to warn a week ahead of time for a revote, correct?
7 days ahead, yeah.
So that would still give us enough time for another one before July 1st.
Right.
So that's about right in the middle of our options. That sounds reasonable to me. I don't know if it does to other people.
Yep. Michelle?
Yeah, not a big difference, but I just wanted to correct myself because I double checked, and the ballot shall be mailed no less than 15 days before the election.
Okay. So then
Can I have a question?
Just a second.
Okay.
So we don't know if it's possible to get several thousand ballots and envelopes printed up in a week. So we're operating without some pretty crucial information.
And that will be on the town clerks, because they know who's a registered voter. Usually when we're putting out information like that, we're sending it to everyone, but this will just go to registered voters. So we're going to need to work with town clerks on this one.
Right. And we don't know how much that will cost. Do you recall, Lyle or Frank, off the top of your head, what the mailing about the annual meeting, which is just a postcard, cost with no return? That went to every voter.
Yeah, I think it was about 7,000. And, just using really round numbers, just at the office without a special discounted rate, we get a 50-cent meter for postage. So in, round numbers, I think we have, is it 14,000 voter checklist folks? I don't know if that's exact or not, but there's a budgetary number for us just for postage. $7,000 for the one way. If you want to have a return that's 14,000, and then there's the printing cost of the the ballots and so on. So the range is maybe between, I don't know if there's some kind of a discount there that Barb handles that, but maybe it's as low as 12,000, but it could be as high as 15,000. And Sean has noted that he's seen references in the CARE Act that that funding cannot be used to reimburse election costs. So that's definitely a cost of added to the budget, but likely necessary if the legislature does not take action.
Thank you. Tim.
I just have a question. Besides the uncertainty for teachers not having contracts by June 1st, what is the downside of buying us time for a month by borrowing the money for the first month?
A major interruption is for the town offices. If normally, they send out the municipal tax bills in July, and on normal circumstances, obviously, that's coordinated with the school tax bills. So if they don't have if there's no approved school budget, then they have to issue an interim tax bill, and then they have to reconcile that with whatever the ultimate resolution is for electoral or a legislative vote, and then so their cost of managing the tax, not only distributing the bills but reconciling it, it's very significant. So that's a major downside.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to then, I think, given that this is something we don't want to invest in unless we absolutely have to, I'm going to ask for a motion to schedule an Australian ballot for June 30th. And what else do we have to ballot to seek approval of our annual meeting warnings. I don't know how much more specific it needs to be than that. Does anyone like to make that motion?
David?
Yes.
I think you've said it succinctly as Wendy. I took some notes as you were saying that, David. I wrote out a motion to set the annual meeting on June 30th, utilizing the Australian ballot form of voting as authorized by the Secretary of State under the governor's emergency provisions.
That's terrific, and it gives us the option to use any variety of the Australian ballot. We could use we could actually do the in-person if things look better, or we could do the in-person and absentee ballots anyway. Yeah, that gives us a lot of options.
David?
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, go ahead, Wendy. Sean is waiting.
I just want to be recognized to ask Frank if he could send me a chat or an email with the wording of what he got for the motion, please. Thank you.
That would be very helpful. Yes, Sean.
Okay, I just looked in my annual report. There are 14,459 registered voters in the 4 towns, and I agree with Thomas in that if we delay the vote or use your recommendation on the 30th, I think that's good, because if the legislature does do something, then we don't have to waste that money, to have the vote. So I'd be in favor of a later date.
Would you be
yeah.
interested in presenting Frank's motion or to move Frank's motion as presented?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I would like to reiterate and move the motion that Frank just expressed.
And
A second.
Thank you, Tim. Michelle?
I was going to second it
Oh,
too.
you're going to second. Okay. You gotta
I'm
be
all
quick. You gotta be quick. Whoever's, I'm going to mute you, Tim.
Sorry.
It's okay. We have a motion to warn the annual meeting and Australian ballot for June 30th, based on the current emergency regulations from the Secretary of State. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yeah.
Yes, Sean. You'll need to unmute.
I'm sorry. I just have one more question. If that does come to fruition, there is a vote on June 30th. Would we have to borrow at that moment or not? Because the borrowing, if we borrowed $4.2 million in the first month, that incurs probably an $80,000 or $60,000 debt service. So that was one last question. I don't mean to muddy the waters with that question, but it is something to consider.
Yeah, I'm typically, we don't have a lot of typical for the Windham Southeast School District because it will be only the second annual year of operations. But we did not have to borrow last year for July. I would probably bring a resolution to the board to give us the option to borrow, but with our accounts payable and accrued wages, we have a significant amount of accrued wages as of June 30th that, that means they earn their total contract, but they elect to be paid in the summer. And that cash flow would probably alleviate the need to borrow. Certainly, I don't expect we'd need to borrow $4 million, but so it should not be a material amount for the month of July.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion? Seeing and hearing none. Oh yes, Thomas.
Just if we set the meeting, set the vote for, you said the 30th.
Yes.
When do we have to decide and warn where and how it will be? Where and when? When do we have to say it will be here, it will be in this manner?
That's a good question.
So the warning requirement, as you said, David, would be between 30 and 40 days. So no sooner than 40 days and no later than 30 days prior to the June 30. So that the answer would be, that last week in May. Is when the board needs to approve a warning.
So probably next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can have Barb count it out
Yeah,
for us so we can have a.
Yeah, and contact the town clerks and get some, great. Any other comments on the motion? Hearing none, would all unmute, please? And all in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Hearing none, I would say the motion has passed, and we will continue the process of uncovering the mysteries of Vermont politics and dealing with this new world that we are in. I believe that's all we need for, where's my agenda? That's, we have rescheduled the annual meeting as said. So now I would like to approach the consent agenda. which includes the approval of minutes for April 15th, 2020, and the warrants and payroll approvals as presented on the agenda. Can I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Anne. And could I have a second, please?
Second, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Moved by Anne, seconded by Emily to approve the consent agenda. Again, please unmute and if you signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the consent agenda for warrants and April 15th minutes is approved. We have a lot of visitors and members of the public. Is there any comments or any recognition or announcements from our visitors? This is the public participation, which used to come at the beginning of the meeting. I'm not seeing any blue hands. So and the next item is communications. We did receive an inquiry from the group that was promoting the placement of a POW MAA flag on the high school flagpole. They're asking what was the current situation, and Lyle and Steve and I all replied independently, and I think Kelly was very happy with the scope of responses she got. So, and what the response was that we're not in business right now. The student council has not had a chance to talk about it, and we haven't either. We haven't contacted the lawyer or followed up on it because the committee has not met. And the Amendment and Policy Committee does still have the work in front of it that it had when they came with the proposal, and they seem to be fine with that. They were just looking for an update. Were there other communications? No. Okay. Then I think we are down to executive session, and while I know about the contractual issue, are there any other issues that we need to take up? Okay, then I would like to move that we enter into executive session under VSA 313 to discuss contracts where the board has determined that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the school board or people involved in a substantial disadvantage. Invited to the executive session are the superintendent, the business manager. I also have invited the Vernon School Board to join us, and Christina Naylor as our former chairperson to also join us for this executive session. There will be no decisions made, and we will arrange to reconnect with BCTV when we come out of executive session. So could I have a motion?
David, were you
Yes.
going to invite Andy Skarzinski?
Oh, yes, I did, but I forgot to mention, yes, and Andy Skarzinski. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to move into executive session and ask anyone that's not invited or a board member to please leave the meeting at this time. Thank you. And I made the motion. Would someone second it? And then we'll have a vote.
Second, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. All those in favor of entering executive session at 7:56, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? We'll be in a moment in executive session as soon as I check.
David,
Yes.
you don't need me after this, right?
No.
Okay.
No,
All right, thank you.
You can check with Rick about the timing if you need to, or one of us can contact. How does it usually? Oh, Thomas.
Probably
I'll
Thomas.
send it.
Yeah, Thomas.
Thank
takes
you.
care of it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So David, will you have any decisions to make?
We will not. Motion to adjourn at 8:38 is approved. We are adjourned.